Hello, it's Blue Orange 22. New haircut. I don't love it. I think it's a little short for me, but what are you gonna do? It'll grow back. But anyway, I am continuing my series on male privilege and the young male crisis. This video is going to be about the education gap and boys' education gap, and I'm actually going to be splitting some of these topics up. So I'm going to be doing another video on the education gap after this. This one might be looking more at the United States, and then my next video will be more international examples, although it does kind of blur a little bit. You might remember these articles. I touched upon this in that first video. In this video, I'm going to be kind of breaking it down and looking at some of the statistics and some of the data. And every study that you're going to see in this video from here on is going to be linked down in the description below. So let's get started here. Girls make higher grades than boys in all school subjects, analysis finds. So what the education gap really is boys doing worse in school than girls. As this first thing shows, getting lower grades in all subjects. And actually, as you read the article, you'll see it's all ages too. So boys get lower grades in all subjects and at all ages. And the boys' education gap really persists throughout the entire education career. Boys are less likely to graduate high school, they're less likely to attend college, and this of course has lifelong consequences. Girls make higher grades than boys in all school subjects, analysis finds. Imagine if that was the other way around. Imagine if there was a study that came out showing that girls get lower grades in all subjects at all ages. I can imagine that it would be considered a very different social issue. It would be considered much more important. I can imagine feminists calling it the girls' education crisis and the girls' education gap, and saying the education system is sexist and the education system is failing girls and it's failing female students. But because it's boys getting lower grades in all subjects, you've probably never heard of this before until watching this video, and it's not something that people ever really talk about. And yeah, you might see the articles that I talk about here, but you never really see anything done about it, and you probably never saw any of these articles until watching these videos anyway. But it's a very big gap when you think about it. Boys are getting lower grades in all subjects at all ages. Now, the reason for this is varied and debated, and there are different theories as to why boys are getting lower grades. But there are a couple studies, actually multiple studies, but there's a couple I'm going to look at in this video that show that boys are actually discriminated against in grading, and boys are actually given lower grades for the same work. This is the first study. Teachers give higher marks to girls, and you can see an OECD report on gender and education across more than 60 countries found that girls receive higher marks compared to the boys of the same ability. Researchers suggest that girls are better behaved in class, and this influences how teachers perceive their work. Differences in school results can sometimes have little to do with ability, says the study. Now, when it says researchers suggest that girls are better behaved in class, that's one theory that is sometimes debated, but the next study I'm going to show you here, Boys Lag Behind, How Teachers' Grading Biases Affect Student Achievement. This was a study from the MIT School of Economics, and it broke down all of the different factors in the grading gap, and it looked at why are boys getting lower grades, and it found that when you control for all the factors such as bad behavior, such as not doing your homework as much, it still found a raw bias where boys are getting lower grades than girls for exactly the same work. You can see I used a combination of blind and non-blind test scores to show that middle school teachers favor girls when they grade. This favoritism estimated in the form of individual teacher effects, has long-term consequences. As measured by their national evaluations 3 years later, male students make less progress than their female counterparts. Gender bias grading accounts for 21% of boys falling behind girls in math during middle school. So that's an example of direct discrimination against male students. And again, just imagine if there were studies coming out saying the opposite. Imagine if there were studies coming out saying that teachers are giving lower grades to girls for the same work. I can imagine it would be considered a much bigger deal, and you probably would have heard about it much more. I can imagine feminists saying, this is how the education system is hostile against girls, hostile against women, and girls are being disadvantaged for life in the education system. But this is actually exactly what's happening to boys right now, and it's not something that most people are even aware of. I did talk about, when I went to the Women's March, I talked to this couple that had their 8-year-old son with them, and they had never heard of the gender gap in education, and it's something that you'll really only ever hear from MRAs. And the effect of this is rather obvious and rather blatant. Boys are less likely to graduate high school and less likely to go to college. You can see here for high school, boys are no match for girls in completing high school. Nationwide, about 72% of the girls in the high school class of 2003, but only 65% of the boys earned diplomas. A gender gap that is far more pronounced among minorities. And that's an interesting point, because that's one example of what MRAs mean when we say the men's rights movement is not just for white men, and it's not a white men's movement as some people think. Although, just to be clear, in these studies you will see that it does affect boys of all races. So it's not just something that affects minority male students. It does affect everyone. But minority male students are especially affected. And this is an example of the men's rights movement helping minority males in a way that feminism does not. But that's kind of for another video. Now, the effect of getting lower grades in high school and not graduating high school, of course, affects going to college. And as I've shown before, men are now less likely to go to college, and men are now the minority of college students in the United States and also around the world, which I'm going to be getting to in future videos. Now, of course, not going to college has an effect on the rest of your life. You're less likely to get a high-paying job. You're more likely to be employed. You're more likely to be in prison. You're more likely to be homeless. Your life expectancy is shorter. Your entire socioeconomic well-being statistically is negatively affected by not going to college. And there's an entire systemic bias against boys that starts from an early age. It's a systemic disadvantage that affects male students, and it has lifelong consequences, as this series is about the young male crisis. I'm going to be looking at how it affects employment, how it affects economic well-being, economic status, all of that sort of stuff I'm going to be looking at. But anyway, read the articles and tell me what you think down below.